the first episode of Season 2 of Hanna, Hanna and Clara have made a life together in the forest, in the same forest that she grew up in with her father. And because of that, she can even hear her father's instructions in her head about what to do in everyday life. But one day they end up getting hunted by a drone. And while they're able to evade it, they know that they're not in the clear yet. Now they're able to survive by stealing supplies from local hunters and a couple of cabins that are close by. And while Hanna is used to this lifestyle because she grew up with it, Clara isn't. But she does like Hanna's company. At one point while they're just kind of hanging out, Hanna notices that there's something lodged in Clara's arm. Clara explains it was put there by the people at the Utrecht facility, so Hanna cuts it out and says, "You don't need this anymore," and keeps it. Even though Clara likes being with Hanna and likes being free, she still wants to leave the forest. And it's very ironic that now it is Hanna who is the one telling her we can't leave, the forest is safe. She explains to her that just because the Utrecht facility that she left is no more doesn't mean there aren't others, and they're being hunted. And that drone that was after them wasn't after Hanna, it was after Clara. And Clara apologizes saying, "You're right, you're just trying to keep me safe," but she can't get the thought of her mother being out there out of her head. And she can track down her mother by living in a forest, even though she knows that Hannah's probably right. So one day she goes to one of those cabins that they break into and she finds a mother and daughter and explains to them that she's lost. She can't find her mother and she has no cell phone. She tells them her mother's name and they do a quick Google search and find her Facebook page that says that she's staying at a hotel in a town about 2 hours away. And the mother is willing to take her there. And this is all while Hanna is off hunting, having no idea where Clara is. So Clara, the girl, and her mother head off to meet with her mom. But that Facebook page wasn't actually real. After Marissa was picked up with the gunshot and was rehabbing, she gets reintroduced to a guy that she knows from her training days named John Carmichael. And Carmichael has her explain once again her story about how she got shot, how Hanna got away, what happened to Eric. And while she's sticking true to her story, it doesn't seem like he really believes it. He explains to her how all the girls were taken to another location called the Meadows to get acclimated to the real world. And while the Meadows is supposed to be in a secret location, it's actually in northern England, although the girls don't know that. They're given new clothes, new freedoms, new identity, and for the first time in their life, they're actually able to live like teenage girls. So this is really the final step in their training, and once they're done here, they get put out into the real world, where they can live a normal everyday life and not be noticed until they're needed, and then they can simply flip a switch and they have super soldiers. And no one's going to suspect a teenage girl is killing for the government. The issue is Clara, because the way that Clara acted wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to act out. She was supposed to follow orders. And they don't know why that happened, so they need to get her back. And they need to figure out if she's a one-off or if this is a problem that can be fixed. Now, he doesn't buy her story. He thinks that she got way too attached to Hanna and let her go, but he's willing to sweep that under the rug if Marissa helps him get Clara back. And he reassures her that they're going to leave Hanna alone. So with not a whole lot of options, she agrees. So Carmichael tells him how they know she's in the forest, but Marissa says if they're in the forest, you're not going to find Hanna. She knows that terrain better than anybody. And Marissa's hunch is that the way to get to Clara is through her mother, because she saw who her mother actually is. And they're able to confirm through the girl that was living next door to Clara, a girl whose new name is Sandy, that she did in fact see her mother's identity. So they set up that fake Facebook page. Because the real story what happened to Clara's mother is that she was an immigrant who got accidentally pregnant, gave her baby up, and then disappeared. There's no trace of her whatsoever on the internet, and Carmichael even doubts the name that she gave them is her real name anyway. So when Clara shows up at the hotel being dropped off by that family, she's expecting to see her mother, but instead, she's greeted by Marissa Wiegler, who tries to immediately calm her down because she's annoyed that her mother actually isn't there, and she's been trapped, and Marissa tells her that her mother is dead. She explains how she's very important to them because they are all Clara has, and that she can have a completely new identity, and hands her the same book that all the other girls get, with the whole backstory, pictures, and everything. But Clara isn't interested in any of that. She wants her mother. And when she tries to leave, Marissa signals to her that it's not safe because the whole interaction is being watched by Carmichael in another room, but Clara doesn't seem to get the message. When she goes to leave, 2 soldiers come in, and she makes quick work of them, but then more soldiers come in and tase her and drag her out of there. Carmichael then walks in the room and offers Marissa her old job back, but she doesn't answer him and says, "You didn't really leave Hanna alone, did you?" And he goes on to explain that they found the cabin and there was a shootout. And one of the soldiers shot a gas tank that resulted in the cabin being blown up, and unfortunately, Hanna was inside. And that never meant to happen, but she's dead. And Marissa then kicks him out, but before he leaves his business card saying the offer's still on the table if you reconsider. But Hanna didn't die. I think she actually jumped into the porta potty of the cabin, and that's how she survived the blast, but either way, she's very much alive. And she was able, right before the shootout happened, to grab an address of the people that live there. So she ends up going to their house and demanding to know where they took Clara. And while Marissa Wiegler is sitting in the hotel lobby, kind of mourning the loss of Hanna, in walks Hanna and just waves at her. Now, I touched on the Meadows a little bit earlier, but let me explain that some more. Because Sandy is all in on this backstory idea. I mean, she's diving right into it. And their lead teacher at the Meadows is a guy named Leo who teaches them about the dangers in the real world. And while they were trained in combat at the Utrecht facility, they're going to learn how the world works here at the Meadows. The Meadows is there to hone their social skills. So one of the things they're instructed to do, just to be normal, is talk to their, quote, family members on Facebook. But of course, they're not actually talking to their family members because those people don't exist. They're actually talking to a CIA agent fresh out of Langley who is tasked with coming up with thousands of identities and talking to all the girls in these different characters. Basically, she's a one-man burner account. So that's who Sandy ends up talking to when she thinks she's talking to her mom. And Sandy made a friend named Jules, but Jules seems to realize that this thing is fake. And Sandy takes exception to that, saying, well, why can't it be real? If we get out in the real world, why can't we talk to our family? But this is another example of it seems like Jules kind of gets it, and Sandy doesn't. She doesn't have a family. This is all fake. In episode 2, Sandy sees there's a shipment delivered to the Meadows, and she finds it weird. So at lunch, she brings it up to Jules, but Jules is just bragging about how woke she is because she's reading The Catcher in the Rye. Eventually, though, Sandy is able to work it into the conversation, and Jules says it's nothing. There's delivery here all the time. But Sandy says, no, I think this one's different. I feel like somebody's brought back. And her intuition is correct because Clara was brought back and she's being interrogated by Leo. Leo tells her that everything that Marissa told her was correct. Her mother is dead. And if she wants any kind of life, it's got to be here at the Meadows. Clara, who is crying at this point, asks what happened to Hanna, and he explains that Hanna died when the cabin exploded. He tries to comfort her by saying it's not her fault. Hanna broke into the Utrecht facility by herself. This is on her. But Clara ends up grabbing him by the throat. And this is all seen by Carmichael, who's watching this on the security camera footage, but he doesn't step in. Eventually, Clara releases her grip, and Leo says, let me show you something. He then brings her in the control room and then shows her the security camera that's in the cafeteria and says, do you recognize any of those girls? And it's all the girls that she grew up with having fun and laughing, and he explains to her that that could be you. So they integrate her into a classroom where Sandy ends up seeing her for the first time. After class, she's sitting in her room, and Sandy comes to visit her. She welcomes her back and explains that her new name is Sandy, and then she compliments the clothes that they gave her. And while Sandy seems to be fine with not asking questions, Clara wants to know where they are, but all Sandy can give her is that we're at the Meadows, even though she has no idea where the Meadows actually are located. Sandy then explains that she goes and talks to her fake family all the time and implores Clara to do the same thing when she's ready. But the conversation needs to end because Sandy needs to go off to piano practice. And it leaves Clara looking at this book that's been given to her, kind of creeped out, at least it seems, from the fact that she's been photoshopped into all these pictures with these strangers that she doesn't actually know, that are supposed to be her family, when she knows that her mother is actually out there. So she's having trouble getting reintegrated, and it's been noticed by not just Carmichael, but the CIA agent named Terry. So that night, Carmichael goes and introduces himself to Terry and compliments her on the job she did with giving Clara a backstory. But as the two watch the live feed from Clara's room, it's just obvious that she's not into this new life yet. That same night, Jules and Sandy seemingly have made up, and they're hanging out in Jules' room, and Jules says, there's something I gotta tell you. I broke up with my boyfriend. And this shocks Sandy. She cannot believe that Jules had the audacity to break up with her fake boyfriend because he was, quote, so hot. And they get into a little bit of a tiff with Sandy saying, you know, I just don't get you. You make everything so difficult. Now they've got to find you another guy. And Jules takes exception to that, saying, why does it always have to be guys? She's clearly giving a gay vibe to Sandy, but Sandy is unable to pick up on any cues whatsoever. I guess this is what happens when you're raised in a lab. The next day, Sandy writes all of this information about Clara and about Jules to her fake mom and sends it off and then heads off to music class. But Clara is looking for her, and she finds out that she's going to be in the cafe later, so she waits there for her and explains how she ran off with Hanna and what happened to her, how she died. But then she left the forest to go find her mother, and she found it really weird that they knew that she'd be looking for her mother because the only person that knew that she knew her mother's identity was Hanna and Sandy. And Sandy apologizes, but also can't figure out why she wouldn't want to live in the Meadows. And this pisses off Clara, who doesn't want to be trapped in a cage. So the two end up getting into a fist fight where Clara ends up getting the better of her, and not just her, but Jules, who also runs in. And it gets to the point where Clara has to be ripped off of Jules. Clara is thrown into solitary confinement while Sandy and Jules head back to Jules' room, and Sandy is patching her up, but you definitely get the vibe that Jules has a crush on Sandy. Now, Leo and Carmichael can't figure out why Clara is doing so poorly. They're perplexed, and they bring in Terry and ask her opinion. She says maybe it's because she feels like she's different. And Carmichael asks her to see if she can get through to her, because if she fails, they're going to have to get rid of her. And it's going to cost a lot of money, and it's something that nobody wants to see. So that night, Terry goes into the solitary confinement room, and Clara wants nothing to do with her, and Terry says, that's fine, but I just don't want you to be alone tonight, and just sits there. Now, Marissa has made her way back to Paris and accepted a job with the CIA, the same job she had. And upon arriving at her place, she notices that she's being spied on by two people in a van. When she enters her apartment, she sees a breakup letter from her boyfriend saying that he can't do this anymore. He can't deal with the secrecy. She heads off to work and gets quickly briefed on what she missed, and she gets introduced to the person who was filling in for her when she was gone, a person from Langley named Sonia. And Sonia is really there to spy on her for Carmichael. Every day, she's supposed to call up Carmichael and give him a briefing, and Carmichael explains that when he was training Marissa, she was an average student. She flew under the radar. No one really noticed her until the day of her exams, when she rose to the top of her class out of nowhere. So don't get fooled by her. She's very intelligent, and she knows what she's doing. Do not let her out of your sight. And you even see that when Marissa knows she's being tailed by Sonia and ends up losing the tail by hopping on somebody's motorcycle, speeding away, and outsmarting Sonia. When she gets back to her apartment that day, waiting for her is Hanna, who has arrived on her own, of course by invitation from Marissa. And Marissa dyes her hair to kind of change her look and takes a photo of her for a fake passport that she's going to get made up for her. She's also made contact with an old teacher of hers that lives in Canada about taking care of Hanna. And while the teacher knows that he can't find out exactly where Hanna came from or what the story is, it seems like he has agreed to take her in. The next day in the office, Marissa goes and confronts Sonia in the office, telling her that she knows exactly what she's doing, that she's nothing more than a mole for Carmichael. When the reality is that she is a woman who has come back to Paris after a lengthy mission, found out that her boyfriend has broken up with her, and she's just trying to get him back. So, Marissa warns her that if I see you in my personal life again, I'm going to rip your fucking face off, and I'm going to send it to Carmichael in a box. And that seems to get the message. She then goes to meet with the guy that's going to make Hanna's fake Canadian passport. And when she gets home that night for dinner, she explains who Hanna's going to live with and how this is going to be a safe opportunity. That Eric promised her this, but she's actually going to deliver it. A new life completely with no strings attached and not traceable. It's important that she doesn't leave the house because they currently think that she's dead. And if they find out that she's alive, they're going to still come after her. And even though Hanna is hearing this, it seems to be going in one ear and out the other because all she can focus on is where is Clara. And Marissa tells her, I don't know, and honestly, it's not your problem at the moment. But Hanna's making it her problem because she's kept that thing that she pulled out of Clara's arm. And written on it is the word passway. So she's able to finagle her way into a neighbor's house by flirting with the boy that lives there, asking for coffee. But in reality, she uses his computer to Google passway, find out how far it is from her current location, and then steals the boy's father's wallet that has money and credit cards in it. She then ends up making her way to the passway facility where she finds out that they're doing trials that day. Unfortunately for her, she's not signed up and she doesn't have a form. So she ends up kind of mugging a girl in the parking lot for hers and ends up switching clothes with her so she doesn't look like the same girl that walked up 15 minutes ago. And this works. She's able to get in. And this is going to be a trial. It's going to take a couple days. But all she really wants to know is what's going on there and how to get some answers. When she gets put into a room, they give her a pill to swallow, and initially she doesn't want to do it, but she has to when she finds out that if she doesn't swallow the pill, she's going to get kicked out. So she reluctantly swallows it and gets put in another room, but then she starts tripping balls. I mean, she is hallucinating big time. She's hearing voices, she's seeing things on the TV screen, she's hyperventilating, and eventually she grabs the laptop computer and throws it through a window. She then starts attacking the doctors, thinking that they're soldiers, and at this point, real soldiers are coming for her. But she takes them out and grabs one of the guns. She walks into a room and finds a guy typing away on a laptop about the Utrecht facility and about the Meadows, and ends up putting a gun to his head and saying, where is the Meadows? But before she can actually get an answer to that, soldiers come and start shooting at her, so she runs away. And just in the nick of time, Marissa shows up, because Marissa found out where she was when that same boy found her and said, hey, do you know the girl that lives up there? Because she stole my dad's wallet and I'm going to need that back. So Marissa hopped on his computer and looked at the search history and found out that she was going to the Passway facility. And she picks up Hanna just in the nick of time. In episode 3, the news has gotten wind of what went down at Passway, but they're unaware that it was Hanna because Hanna stole that woman's identity in the parking lot, and they think it's that mystery woman. That doesn't mean that Carmichael isn't concerned, though, and he calls up that guy who was typing away on his computer that Hanna tried to strong-arm and tells him that he needs to get the pharmaceuticals out of the building without the cops knowing because they're getting a little too close. Carmichael then goes and has a meeting with both Terry and Leo about Clara, and Clara didn't sleep and didn't warm up to Terry at all. He gives them 2 days to conform Clara or he's going to have to pull the plug. So Terry goes and talks to Clara, but she's not warming up at all. In fact, it's pissing her off even more. She yells at her, why are you even trying to be nice to me? Why do you even care? And Terry tells her that I know what it's like to be the odd one out. And Clara says to her, well, do you have a mother? And Terry says, yes, I do. And Clara says, well, then you will never know what it's like to be me. I am not like these other girls. So the attempts to conform Clara aren't going so great. Hanna, meanwhile, is hunkered down in Marissa's apartment, and she tells Marissa all about Passway, what she's found out, and she tells her that they've taken her to a place called the Meadows because she saw that guy typing away on the computer although she doesn't know where it is. She also hands Marissa over the medication that she pulled out of Clara's arm. Marissa is trying to get through to Hanna that it's best to just leave Clara be and get off to Canada and save herself while they think that she's still dead. But Hanna feels like she's obligated to free Clara out of the meadows. She tells Marissa that Clara is going to escape, or at least try to again, and when she does that, they're going to kill her. And Hanna wants Marissa to help her get Clara out of there because she feels like Marissa should have some guilt in this. She's the one who handed Clara over to them. And she asks her, why did you even do that? And Marissa says, well, I did it for you. I did it to protect you. And Hanna says, I didn't ask you to. Look, if we don't do something, she is going to die. We need to find her. And we need to do so together. So Marissa agrees. Hanna heads back to the Passway facility and ends up stealing a woman's key card and making her way in. She finds a brochure that confirms that man who is typing away on this computer and his title at Passway. She calls Marissa and tells her the latest, and Marissa says, okay, well, if you see him, call me immediately. Hanna then hangs up the phone and heads down to the parking garage, steals someone's keys, and waits in the car for this guy to come out so she can follow him. Marissa, meanwhile, is running a few errands, one of them being getting a passport for Clara. The other being trying to track down where Sonia is, because when Marissa called out of work that day, she found out that Sonia also called out of work, and she finds it fishy. So she calls Sonia up and tries to be good cop, apologizing for how she talked to her and asking her if she wants to go get coffee, while actually, she's tracing her cell phone. And she finds out that Sonia was sent to Belgium, and she was sent there by Carmichael, who wants to interrogate the girl who was arrested at Passway. And when she gets there, the girl's telling them, I don't know what you want from me. I'm not this girl. I told you that multiple times. So Sonia starts showing her some pictures while Carmichael's on the phone, and one of those pictures happens to be Hanna. And the girl says, yeah, that's her. I mean, with blonde hair, but that's definitely her. And this is the first inclination that the group has that Hanna is actually alive. So when Marissa is heading to meet Hanna at Passway, she gets a phone call from Carmichael telling her, yeah, we think it might have been a false flag. We think Hanna might be alive. If she reaches out to you, tell us immediately. And Marissa, who had been trying to get a hold of Hanna unsuccessfully, sends her a voice recording that says, Hanna, be careful, they know you're alive. And Hanna isn't getting these because she's in an underground parking garage with no service. But she's not in it for long because the guy that she's trying to tail ends up creating a diversion that opens the gates and he's able to sneak out of the facility with the medication, but Hanna is on his tracks. Hanna ends up tailing him to a restaurant. The issue is that Sonia has also tailed Hanna. Through facial recognition, she was able to find out where she was heading and where she parked, and Hanna has no idea. Hanna ends up seeing this guy go through the medical exchange with his contact, but lucky for her, she called Marissa and told her where she was. And Marissa, who is heading to Hanna, sees Sonia and tells her, hey Sonia, Carmichael sent me, I have something for you. And then she shoots her in the head. While that was going on, Hanna actually got caught by this guy. And he starts questioning her a bit, but Marissa comes in to save the day, screaming at her that wait till your father finds out about this and painting the picture that Hanna is her daughter and Hanna stole her father's car keys. So it's believable enough they get in the car and they get the hell out of there. Or at least so it seems. They're actually going to tail the medication. And on the car ride, Marissa asks her, what is it about Clara? And Hanna says, in those woods, I felt something. I felt a connection. Like we were the same person. Now, back at the Meadows, Leo has gone to check up on Sandy, who is still roughed up a little bit. She asks for an update on Clara, saying that she shouldn't be here. She's dangerous. And Leo says, I agree with you. She's in isolation now, and look, I'm not happy about this either. He then notices that she's holding a Bible, and it was a Bible that was planted in her room by her, quote, family. Leo tells her, oh, great, you got the Bible. Yeah, your parents say that you just loved reading it when you were younger. But Sandy shoots back, I don't remember that. And it's really the first time that we see Sandy questioning her new identity. Leo doesn't blink, though, and says, yeah, I went to Sunday school every day, but I don't remember what they taught me there. Leo then goes to meet with Carmichael, and they're both watching Clara on a security camera feed, and Carmichael goes, what's wrong with her arm? And Leo says, well, we had to put in new medication. She ripped the old one out. And Carmichael says, or somebody ripped it out. And he goes in the warehouse and looks at the medication pill, and sure enough, it says Passway, and he's starting to put all of this together. Leo's day isn't done, however, because he then goes to meet with Terry, who tells him that the issue with Clara is the fact that she knows she has a mother, and she knows her mother is out there, and she's dealing with the burden of not knowing if her mother actually ever loved her or not. And until she is able to find that answer out, she's going to continue to have this pushback and have this attitude. The girl needs closure. So they come up with an idea. They doctor a fake note, give it to Clara, and tell Clara that it was written by her mother the day that she gave up Clara for adoption. And the note goes on to say how much she loved Clara, how she's so heartbroken about this, but she knows she's putting Clara in a better place. And since Clara is gullible, she believes all of it. And she gets the closure she was seeking. And while Clara was reading this fake letter, Sandy, Helen, and Woke Jules are in the cafeteria, and Helen is taken up reading The Catcher in the Rye because Woke Jules was just raving about it a week ago. But Jules says that's a piece of shit. Helen looks at her and says, "You said last week that this was good." And Woke Jules says, "Girl, you better keep up. Things move fast around here." She comes off just like the guy in the bar in Good Will Hunting.
My contention is that prior to the Revolutionary War, the economic modalities, especially in the southern colonies, could most aptly be characterized as agrarian pre-capital.
All right, of course that's your
Hang on a
contention.
second.
You're a first-year grad student. You just got finished reading some Marxian historian, Pete Garrison probably. You're going to be convinced of that till next month when you get to James Lemon. Then you're going to be talking about how the economies of Virginia and Pennsylvania were entrepreneurial and capitalist way back in 1740. That's going to last until next year. You're going to be in here regurgitating Gordon Wood, talking about, the pre-revolutionary utopia and the capital-forming effects of military mobilization.
Well, as a matter of fact, I won't, because Wood drastically underestimates the impact
Wood
of
drastically underestimates the impact of social distinctions predicated upon wealth, especially inherited wealth. You got that from Vickers. Work in Essex County, page 98, right? Yeah, I read that too. Were you going to plagiarize the whole thing for us? Do you have any thoughts of your own on this matter?
Yeah, how do you like them apples, Jules? The conversation, though, then gets into God because Sandy did find that Bible, and Woke Jules says that God is nothing more than a man-made myth. And Sandy asks her, "Why do you hate men so much?" And Woke Jules says, "It's because I like girls." And this just blows Helen away. It's as if she's never even thought about the idea that there could be a lesbian in the room. And Helen asks her, "Am I your type?" And Woke Jules says no. And then Sandy asks if she's her type, and even though she is, Woke Jules says, "I think of you more like a sister." And Sandy replies with, "I think the same thing about you." Later that day, Sandy continues to read the Bible, and she's reading about forgiveness when Leo walks in, and she asks him if she can see Clara. And Leo is surprised about this, but sets up the meeting. And in the meeting, Clara apologizes for attacking her. Clara tells her how the Meadows isn't what she imagined. It feels different. And Sandy cuts her off and says, "Yeah, it feels like home. And maybe it's about time you figured out who your real family is." They then head into Clara's room and start looking in her closet, all the while being monitored by Leo and Terry, who are pretty proud of themselves because it seems like they had a breakthrough with Clara. Sandy starts complimenting her on her outfits, calling her by her new name, Clemency, and inviting her to hang out with both Helen and Woke Jules. And Claire's a little concerned that they won't accept her, but Sandy says don't worry about that. So it seems like all of the efforts to get Clara integrated have worked. Hannah, meanwhile, is waiting with Marissa to get on a boat that takes them to England. And while they're doing so, Marissa gets a phone call, and she tells Hannah that it's her ex-boyfriend, and she has to go take this and gets out of the car. But in reality, it is Carmichael. And Carmichael tells her that Hannah killed Sonia, and Carmichael needs her help to get Hannah because he's pretty positive that she's headed to the Meadows, and he can't let that happen. But while she was having this phone call with Carmichael, Hannah started rummaging through her purse. She found the passports for both her and Clara that Marissa had made up. She finds a bunch of money, and she also finds Carmichael's business card. And when she sees Marissa get off the phone with him, she ends up calling it herself, and when he picks up and says, "This is Carmichael," she feels betrayed. So she gets out of the car and goes and hides in an empty flatbed. And Marissa, who has made her way back to the car and finds no Hannah, starts frantically searching for her and finds her in that empty tractor-trailer bed, but they two end up getting into a fight, and Marissa can't figure out what they're fighting about. Hannah gets her into a chokehold and starts telling her that she lied to her, and she always lies, and then she chokes her out and leaves her there. She tails the pharmaceutical guy to the Meadows, hops the fence, takes a bunch of soldiers out, and ends up making her way to Clara at a distance. But what she sees isn't at all what she expected. She sees Clara laughing, having fun with the other girls, and she is shocked. As Clara is walking away with the other girls, she turns around and she sees Hannah, but she doesn't go towards her. And Hannah is frozen still. She is then quickly surrounded by a bunch of other security guards with guns, and Hannah just throws her guns down and surrenders herself. But instead of going to help her, Clara just turns her back on her and walks off. And Hannah is blown away that the girl that she truly believed would never allow this to happen has allowed it to happen, has allowed herself to be integrated at the Meadows. In episode 4, Marissa is recuperating from getting her ass kicked by Hannah when she gets a phone call from Carmichael letting her know that they have Hannah. So Marissa heads to the Meadows to meet up with her. And during her drive, Carmichael tells her that she's going to have to stop and meet somebody who will then drive her to the Meadows as she's hooded in the back. She then asks Carmichael, does Hanna know I'm coming? And Carmichael says no. To which Marissa says, good, let's keep it like that. She then pulls over on the side of the road and puts a tracking chip in a hollowed out lipstick container. She then pins her location to somebody named Mannion and intentionally crashes her car. And the reason she crashed her car is both twofold. One, to make an excuse for why her face looks like that, but two, to ditch her cell phone, because the cell phone is paired to the lipstick container. So when Mannion picks up the cell phone, he's able to pinpoint where the Meadows is and where Marissa is, as well as Hanna, because there's a picture of Hanna on her phone. Upon arriving at the Meadows, Carmichael tells Marissa, I have something to show you, and takes her down to the control room. He goes to clear out the room, but right before he does, Marissa sees one of the soldiers there and sees his username as well as his password to the computer. He then logs out and gets out of the room, and it's just Carmichael and Marissa, and Carmichael has the videotape of Hanna breaking the facility from the other day, and he tells Marissa, when we thought of this program, this is exactly what we envisioned. But Hanna isn't communicating, and they feel like Marissa could be the key to that. So Marissa comes into the room where Hanna's being held, and immediately Hanna wants to fight her. But Marissa tries her best to get the message to her that she's not an enemy. She has to be careful because the whole interaction is being recorded and seen via security camera footage. But she says things to her like, it's been a while since I've seen you, you dyed your hair, it looks great. Marissa is trying her best to make it clear to Hanna that she is there to help her, and she asks, do you trust me? And Hanna says, maybe. Hanna then gets put back into solitary confinement where she's met by Clara. And Clara was forced to meet her there because it was one of Hanna's requests, and Hanna isn't really cooperating at the moment, but Clara doesn't want to be there. The first thing she says to Hanna with a whole lot of attitude is, why did you even bother coming here? And Hanna tells her, I came here for you. Clara tells her that she's fine and wants to get out of there, but right before she leaves, Hanna says, they told me that if you're okay with it, you'd show me around the grounds because I'm thinking about staying. And as Clara is showing Hanna around, she notices that she's been chipped. She also notices that people are calling her Clemency, and Clara says, yeah, that's my new name. And when she gets to Clara's room, she sees the photos of her fake family, and that's kind of the last straw for her. Hanna can't believe that Clara is buying into this lie. Eventually, Hanna is able to get Clara alone in a room that's supposed to be for staff only, that is one of the few places in the Meadows that doesn't have a security camera, and is able to talk to her one-on-one without the fear of being caught. The first thing Hanna does after hugging her and apologizing is to try to get the chip out of her arm, but Clara says, no, you can't, they'll know. And Hanna says, you don't want me to take it out, do you? I mean, look at you. Look at the way you're dressed. This isn't you. And Clara says, well, they do it to everybody. I mean, they're going to do it to you too. And Hanna shoots back, no, they're not. I'm not here to become one of you guys. I'm here to get you out. Hanna then goes on to tell her about the plan to get to Canada. And she also tells her that Marissa Viegler is in the facility and is there to help them. And all they have to do is get out of the Meadows. At this point, though, security is wondering where they are and they're banging on the door. And Hanna needs an answer. And Clara says, okay, fine, I'll go with you. Now, as Hanna was making her impassioned plea to Clara, Jules and Sandy were trying to grab some booze because Leo had let it slip that they were having an alcohol shipment delivered there that day, and Jules wants to throw a party. So Sandy distracts the driver by flirting with him a little bit, and Jules grabs the alcohol. Once they get out of there, though, the security guy radios to the control room, hey, all clear, because that whole thing was set up by Leo. He wants the girls to get into a little bit of mischief because that's what normal girls do. Later that day, both Marissa and Carmichael meet with Hanna, and Hanna agrees to give the Meadows a shot. And Carmichael tells her, great, we'll get you a new identity and we'll start to get you integrated with the other girls. But during this meeting, Marissa is able to pass a note to Hanna that tells her that they're planning on leaving that night at 10 p.m. So be ready. So right after the meeting, they go and they introduce Hanna to all the other girls with her new name, Mia Wolf. Her new identity is currently being built, but one of the things is going to be that she's from Germany. And most of the girls remember Hanna from trying to break them out of the Utrecht facility, and some of them are a little standoffish towards her. Later that day, Hanna goes through her first lesson, face and trigger. And it's a pretty simple concept. The face and trigger are two people that know each other, although they're supposed to pretend that they don't. The face distracts people, while the trigger ends up doing the job. And the lesson is being watched by Marissa and Carmichael. And Marissa is kind of patting herself on the back saying, this is great, she has a family here, my job is done, I guess I'll head out tonight. But Carmichael wants to hire her back because they're so close to finishing this thing. And Marissa says, well, if you hire me back, are you going to tell me the truth? Are you going to tell me who's funding this thing? And the answer to that is no, so Marissa says, okay, well, I'm leaving tonight. Can you facilitate a ride? Now, after that lesson, Clara and Hanna headed to the cafeteria, where privately Hanna tells Clara that the plan is to leave at 10 p.m. And Clara tells Hanna, well, that's going to be tough to do because there's lockdown at 9. The private conversation, though, is interrupted because they arrive at the table with both Jules, Sandy, and Helen. And Jules tells all the girls that there's going to be a party in her room that night because they've gotten alcohol. Helen says, well, what happens if we get caught? I mean, what happens if Leo catches us? And Jules says, don't worry about Leo. I've got him wrapped around my finger. The next lesson they go to, though, is target practice. And Hanna asks Clara, all right, explain this lockdown procedure. And she says, well, at 9 o'clock, they lock the doors and they turn the cameras off. And if you try to leave the accommodation block, alarms will go off. And one of the reasons why Jules can have a party after 9 o'clock is because her room is in the accommodation block. So Hanna thinks about it and says, okay, I'll figure out a way. Right after target practice, Leo catches up with Hanna and says, hey, let me show you to your new room. And it's pretty bare bones, and he apologizes for that, saying that they'll make it more homey. But right as he's about to leave, he says, by the way, I saw what you did in the security camera footage yesterday. Very impressive. Now, as Hanna was getting acclimated to her new room, Sandy, who was walking with a couple friends, notices that Clara is sitting by herself under a tree, and she just looks bothered about something. So Sandy, trying to be a good friend, heads over there to find out what's bothering her, and Clara lets it slip that Hanna isn't there to be integrated. Hanna is there to escape, and she's trying to break out tonight with Clara. Later that night, Carmichael tells Marissa that her ride is there, and Marissa asks him, hey, would you mind it if I saw Hanna one last time? And Carmichael says, sure, why not? So Leo and Marissa head up to the girls' rooms, and they catch them having that party, although nobody even mentions it. Marissa tells Hanna that there's a car collecting her that night, and it seems like she's got a good thing going, so best of luck. And right before she leaves, Hanna says, well, be careful, because after 9 o'clock, they turn on the alarm system. Leo assures the room that, don't worry, I'll take care of that. But right before he leaves, he pops his head back in and says, oh, by the way, good job getting the booze. Face and Trigger, Sandy, you were amazing. And all of the girls are amazed that Leo is cool with this and even set it up, except for Jules, who seems pissed off that she just got played. Because it turns out she was the one who was actually wrapped around Leo's finger. But that hint that Hanna gave to Marissa was a useful one, because Leo drops Marissa off at the front door, and he thinks that, all right, she's going to get in the car and leave, but she doesn't. She's able to get back in the facility and head to the control room, where she sees that soldier whose password she poached earlier, and she tells the soldier, hey, Carmichael's looking for you. So the soldier leaves, and she ends up using that username and password to get into the system and forces a power outage that's set to go off in 3 minutes. She then gets in the car, and when they get to the front gate, the driver has her put the hood on, but instead of putting the hood on, she ends up killing the driver. She hops in the passenger seat and races back to the meadows to pick up both Clara and Hanna, who, when the power went out, did in fact escape. Or so they thought. They're trying to find their way out, but to no luck. And when somebody gets in the car, Marissa thinks this is great, it's Hanna and Clara, but in fact, it's Carmichael, because Clara ratted them out. And eventually, Clara and Hanna end up back in their rooms, and Hanna is pissed, yelling, what did you just do? But Clara says, well, why can't you just be happy here? As her and the rest of the girls slowly converge on Hanna as she gets claustrophobic and shocked that she might actually have to stay there. In episode 5, Marissa is arrested and taken into custody, where she meets with Carmichael, and he tells her that he knows everything. The passports, hiding Hanna in Paris, trying to get her to Canada to be with one of her old professors. But Marissa plays dumb, acting like she doesn't know what he's talking about. And Carmichael instructs the guards to take her away until they could figure out what to do with her. Hanna, meanwhile, is meeting with Terry about her new personality profile. But Hanna doesn't want one. She says she already has an identity. She doesn't need a fake one. Either way, though, she's going to get one, and as Terry types away on the computer, figuring out little interesting facts about her new life, Hanna finally cuts her off and lists a bunch of facts, proving a point that she can create a new life in a matter of seconds. She tells Terry, this isn't difficult to do. I've done it before. I've lived to somebody else. But Terry lays it out pretty simply. You can continue to be Hanna and be hunted for the rest of your life, or you can be Mia Wolf and actually have the chance of a good life. The choice is yours. Let me know what you think. And then she hands over her personality profile and sends her on her way. Hanna's walking through the cafeteria when she's flagged down by Sandy to come join her, and Sandy wants to know if Hanna's still mad at Clara, and in fact she is, and Sandy tries to make the case that she shouldn't be, because Clara just did what she thought was best. Clara ends up arriving at the table, and her and Hanna have an awkward stare down, but it doesn't really go anywhere because everyone's interested in reading up on Hanna's new identity. The group of her, Jules, Sandy, Helen, they all head out to the lake and they start reading up on it, but Hanna's not as into this as they are. They try to talk her into it, though, saying that, yeah, it's weird and we all had trouble adapting to this at first, everybody except for Sandy, who bought in from day one, but if you just go with it, it's kind of cool. Hanna doesn't think so, though, and the final straw is when they bring up her parents, and she tells them that her mother died trying to save her life and her dad died at the Utrecht facility, and she buried him next to her in a Romanian grave, and storms off. She goes back to her room where she's met by Clara, who is trying to convince her to buy into this, but Hanna's yelling at her that everything is fake. The picture over there of that guy that's supposed to be her father is fake. And Clara picks it up and says, this guy is as real as Eric was. Because there's no reason that all of this can't be real. What they're offering us here is a fresh start. Because there's no life for us out there without them. And you know that. That's why you came back. Hanna says, I didn't come back for that. I came back for you, but you're not you. You're somebody else. Clara tells her that she's not somebody else. She's the same old Clara. She just has a different name and dresses differently, and that's it. But Hanna's still pissed that Clara lied to her. They all then get called to a training session of a game of Capture the Flag. And they're broken up into teams, and Hanna's put on a team with Clara, Sandy, and Jules. But she decides to go it on her own. And initially her group is kind of pissed at her for leaving them until Hanna dominates. And this is all being watched on a live feed by Leo and Terry, and Leo even makes mention that Hanna is on a whole other level than these girls. At one point in the game, Hanna ends up getting pretty close to the fence where she sees Mannion. After Mannion failed to get contact with Marissa, he knew something was up. So he makes a phone call to somebody who we don't know who it is yet, and whoever that person was instructed him to grab a gun and try to get into the meadows. So when he sees Hanna at the fence, he ends up showing her her picture from Marissa's phone so that Hanna knows that he is on her side. But he then has to hide after Clara ends up saying, hey, by the way, I found the truck where the flag is. Clara, though, ends up getting shot, but Hanna makes quick work of the girl and ends up grabbing the flag and winning it for her team. When everybody gets back to the cafeteria, everybody kind of gives her a standing ovation for dominating that day, and Sandy tries to give her the flag as a trophy, but Hanna doesn't want it. And no one can quite understand why, but Hanna tells Sandy, look, if you're obsessed with it so much, you take it. I don't leaves. And it's obvious to everybody that Hanna is still having trouble getting integrated and buying in. And that everybody includes Terry, who that night meets with Carmichael about this issue, saying that it's pretty obvious that Hanna gravitates towards everything that they're selling except the emotional aspect. Because we're trying to do something with Hanna that we don't have to do with the other girls. We're trying to replace somebody. And in this instance, we're trying to replace Eric Heller, her father. But they've come up with a plan, and that plan is to message Sandy, the girl who bought in from day one with the whole new identity, that her fake sister is in the hospital, and it's serious. So Jules comes and gets both Clara and Hanna to kind of be with Sandy during this time, and during that waiting period, Terry ends up messaging Sandy that her sister didn't make it, and Sandy starts crying into Jules' arms, and Hanna gets up and says, I think I should leave. And right before she does, Sandy says, look, I know you don't believe in all this and you think it's fake, but it's real to me. And my sister was as real as anybody is to you. Hanna continues to walk out, and all of this is being closely monitored by Terry on the security cam footage. But instead of continuing to go to her room, she stops in the hallway and turns back, going to be with the girls. And she tells them to follow her. She brings them out to a tree to have kind of a memorial service for Sandy's fake sister. And she has Sandy say a few words about what her sister meant to her, as she tries to help Sandy through the grieving process. When they get back to the dorms, Clara gives her a hug and thanks her for what she did, and Hanna goes back into her room. And for the first time, she looks through her new identity book, the same book that they give all the girls. But it is a true breakthrough, and a sign that Terry's bold move might have actually worked. So Terry decides maybe this is a good time to try to message her through Facebook, and Hanna ends up writing back, using this as kind of a therapy session, acting like she's talking to her father, Eric. But while the girls were mourning Sandy's fake sister's death, Carmichael had gotten a call from his higher-ups to move Marissa. So he heads downstairs to tell her that she'll be on the move soon, and then hands over a photo of Hanna hugging Clara as a sign of, hey, we won sort of thing. Marissa makes mention that Hanna will never be long here, but Carmichael tells her, well, if you look at the picture, she already does. Marissa then asks him, why don't you just kill me? And he says, I would be glad to, but the higher-ups want you alive. So we'll be on the move soon. And Marissa knows that she's short on time, so she asks one of the guards outside for a bottle of water, but when he goes to give it to her, she ends up grabbing his arm and knocking him out, stealing his key card and escaping. She heads to the control room where she sees Terry, and after a quick conversation about what the girls mean to her, knocking her out. She goes over the computer where she ends up calling up Hanna via the Facebook, and Hanna, who was just talking to Terry, answers the phone and says, Dad? And is very surprised to hear Marissa on the other end. Marissa tells her that she's there to escape, but they don't have much time and asks for her room number. Although Hanna plays dumb, saying that she doesn't really know where she is. And Marissa doesn't buy that at all. She prods for an answer, and Hanna says, I don't want to go, and hangs up. Marissa doesn't give up that easily, though, and ends up escaping and finding out what room she's in and walks in and tells Hanna that all of this is fake. They're not on your side. The person you're talking to, it's not your parents, they're fake. You might have already met them. They're literally paid to talk to all of you girls as fake family members. But Hanna tells her, I'm just tired of running. And Marissa can commiserate with that, but convinces her to come along anyway. And at this point, the guards have realized that she's gone and rang the alarm. So Hanna and Marissa end up meeting up with Mannion, who is able to get into the meadows and try to help them escape. But then Marissa remembers, we need your passport. Where did you hide it? And Hanna says, over here by a tree. But when she grabs the passports, there's two of them. And then she remembers Clara and says, I can't leave without her. Marissa tells her going back for her was a mistake the first time. We've got to go now. But lucky for Hanna, Clara actually followed them out. She ends up stealing the gun from Marissa and pointing it at her, saying that you're not going to take her. She belongs here. Marissa tells Clara that not only does Hanna not belong there, but Clara doesn't belong there either. Those people back there aren't either of your families. She then looks at Clara and says, and by the way, your mother isn't dead. They told me to tell you that. Your mother simply disappeared off the grid after she gave you up. And that doesn't mean that she's dead. And if she's alive, I will help you find her. Marissa then tries to wrangle the gun from Clara, but ends up getting shot. And Hanna was the one holding the gun. Marissa, who is wounded, holding her arm, looks up at Hanna kind of in disbelief, and Clara tells her, you did the right thing. The guards, who were alerted by the gunshot, end up converging on all of them, and Clara tells Carmichael that Marissa tried to get us out of here, but Hanna ended up shooting her. Carmichael tells the guards to get Marissa out of there, and then he looks at Hanna and says, don't worry, you're safe. You're with us now. But Hanna definitely looks uneasy with what just went down. In episode 6, Sandy is writing to her fake mother, telling her how Hanna has finally gotten integrated after a pretty rough start, even allowing them to put that medicine in her arm. And Sandy finishes the message saying that it seems like Hanna realized there was no point in fighting a fight that she just couldn't win. That night, Carmichael gets a phone call from one of his bosses telling him that they have a big issue. There's a whistleblower. And the whistleblower has contacted an investigative journalist in England about going public with the Utrecht story. And Carmichael's boss tells him that it's about time these girls did what they're trained to do. So Carmichael brings in both Hanna and Jules and explains to them the mission, that they're after this investigative journalist named Nicola Goff. And she is the one who's been contacted by this whistleblower who's going by the codename Tacitus. The goal is to find out both Tacitus' true identity while also not allowing Nicola to get the information. They're sending both girls to London where they'll act like they don't know each other, but they'll carry out the mission. This is face and trigger. They tell the girls not to tell anybody about the mission, but they're teenage girls and everybody else finds out that they're being sent off. So while they tell them that they are being sent off, they don't tell them the severity of the mission or any information that was given to them in the dossier. And right before she leaves, Hanna has a private conversation with Clara, who seems like she's a little disappointed that she wasn't chosen to go on the mission with Hanna. Hanna looks at her and says, I thought this is what you wanted. I mean, after all, we could have went. We could have gone after your mother. But Clara cuts her off and says, my mother's dead. Marissa was lying. I'm happy here now. And Hanna says, I'm happy too. But it just seems like by both their facial expressions that neither of them are all that happy. The next day, both Hanna and Jules head off to London separately. And Hanna leaves first. And right before Jules leaves, Leo pulls her aside and has a conversation with her about keeping an eye on Hanna because they still don't really trust her. So both girls head off to London, where they're posing as foreign exchange students at the university where Nicola Goff's wife teaches. And they both just so happen to be in Nicola Goff's wife's class. And this is kind of one of the reasons why Jules was chosen, because she's so damn woke, and she is truly in her element here, arguing politics, acting like a know-it-all, and she's kind of been tasked with buddying up to the teacher, while Hanna is just to complete the mission. And that's what Jules does. She asks the teacher to go get coffee, she buddies up with her, she meets Nicola, and she gets invited to a party that they're having at their house with a bunch of other political philosophers. So later that day, Jules tells Hanna, okay, I'm getting you in there, but it's up to you to actually get the information. They also have a conversation about how natural this feels for Jules, about how she went through all these training missions, but it really does feel like nothing more than a training mission, and she's kind of surprised. She then wonders aloud, I wonder if Sandy's going through the same thing. And Hanna looks perplexed and says, what do you mean? Jules realizes that she kind of screwed up by saying that, but Hanna says, no. There's no secrets between us. We're on the same team. What are you talking about? And Jules reveals to Hanna that both Clara and Sandy were sent to Barcelona to kind of cover both tracks of this thing. And in Barcelona, Sandy is set up as a foreign exchange student, while Clara is posing as an American teenager who took a year off to kind of travel the world. And they're just kind of waiting to be briefed on what they're supposed to do. Later that day in London, as Hanna is walking around, she gets approached by Mannion. He introduces himself formally, and then it goes on to explain that he works for a group that is trying to expose Utrecht. And maybe more importantly, the organization behind Utrecht. Marissa called him when she found out about the Meadows, and whoever Hanna is involved with, they're pretty dangerous people, and he wants to know what they have her doing there. Hanna brushes it off and says, don't bother me, I'm working for them now. But Mannion screams back at her, I will be here every day, same time. And this little impromptu meeting caused Hanna to be late for Nicola Goff's wife's house party. So Jules is able to get her in there. Now it's on to Hanna. And she's looking around the party and finds Nicola Goff drinking alone in the kitchen. And Nicola asks if she's a student, and Hanna says yes. And Nicola explains that this isn't really her thing, parties. Hanna starts asking about what she does, knowing the whole time that she's an investigative journalist, but trying to buddy up to her. And when Nicola reveals that she's an investigative journalist, Hanna asks, how did you get into that? But the conversation is interrupted when Nicola gets a phone call, and it seems to be a private matter because she steps outside to take it. But when she does, Hanna follows her, and from a distance is able to hear that she is on the phone with Tacitus. And Nicola and Tacitus are planning on meeting at a hotel in Barcelona in 2 days. So with this information, Hanna goes sneaking back into the house, going up to Nicola's office, and finding her private notebook. She quickly takes a bunch of pictures of the notes and uploads it to Terry back at the Meadows. Hanna is quickly able to get downstairs back in the kitchen without being caught. And when Nicola comes back in the kitchen, she says, "Oh, where were we? That's right, you wanted to know how I got into this." And she goes on to tell Hanna that she was working on a story in Ireland about these women who were basically kidnapped and held against their will and really never allowed to leave. They were forced to have babies and they even lost those babies. Some of them were taken as babies. And the whole story seems eerily familiar. It seems a lot like this was Utrecht's, and it's got Hanna thinking a bit, because this story just seems to hit really close to home for Hanna. But back at the Meadows, Terry was able to take those pictures that Hanna uploaded and decipher the code that Nicola was using. And through a quick search, she was able to discern that there is one American exchange student in the University of Barcelona who is studying politics, and she just so happens to be the daughter of a military lawyer that has enough clearance to know what's going on with Utrecht. So they're pretty sure that Tacitus is this girl's father. And the guy is named Robert Gelder. So Leo heads into Carmichael's office and lets him know that they're pretty sure Tacitus is this guy named Robert Gelder. But by Carmichael's facial reaction, you can tell that Carmichael knows that this is bad news. Leo asks him, "Did you know him?" And Carmichael reveals that while he doesn't know him personally, he knows the name. He instructs Leo to monitor Robert Gelder and find out if he buys a ticket for Barcelona. As soon as he does, Carmichael wants to be alerted. And Leo says, "Yeah, we've been doing that." But Carmichael snaps back at him, "Do it every hour." And it seems obvious that Gelder knows something. And when Leo asks Carmichael, what exactly does this guy know, Carmichael just doesn't say anything, sending Leo on his way. So the Meadows group gives both Clara and Sandy their orders to find this girl in the University of Barcelona. And it's on Sandy to kind of befriend her and then covertly introduce Clara to her group. And Sandy is able to do that by stealing the girl's wallet and then acting like she found it. And when the girl, along with her friend, find out that Sandy's American, they invite her over to get some lunch, hang out, and now they're in. Now back in London, Jules and Hanna have been giving the order to intercept Nicola Golf. Do not let her get on the flight to Barcelona. Jules even gives Hanna a, quote, book that isn't a book at all. It's a gun with a silencer, because Hanna will be the one that's going to take Nicola out. But Hanna doesn't feel like this is the right thing to do and ends up meeting up with Mannion and telling him all the details, how they're going to go after Nicola Golf, how she's leaving tomorrow. And Mannion instructs her to follow him, but do so at a distance, 6 feet apart, as to not cause suspicion. And they walk into this black site that's posed as a barbershop, where Mannion introduces Hanna to his other associate, a woman named Rachel. And right behind Rachel and Mannion is this corkboard with a bunch of pictures and information. And the pictures include Eric Heller, Marissa Viegler, Carmichael. It's a who's who of the show. And they explain to Hanna that Utrecht was founded by this pioneer group, which really was a splinter cell of nationalist radicals in the CIA. And Mannion and Rachel's group are pretty sure that the pioneers are ready to use Utrecht to carry out a bunch of assassinations around the world, and that Tacitus knows who's on that hit list. Now, this is a lot of information to process, and Hanna leaves, but as she's leaving, she gets caught by Jules, who from across the street is taking pictures of her and calls Leo and says, "Yeah, I think I have a friend problem." So Leo goes to Carmichael about what to do about her, but Terry runs in because Robert Gelder has booked a flight to Barcelona. After Carmichael says, "Thanks, you did great work," and Terry leaves, they continue to talk about what to do with Hanna. And Leo says, "Do you want me to talk to her?" But Carmichael is done talking. He wants Hanna gone. He's ready to cut bait, and he instructs Leo to get rid of her. They then send both Clara and Sandy Robert Gelder's flight information. It's kind of awkward because they're hanging out with Robert's daughter at karaoke when they get it. The next day, both Hanna and Jules are walking over to the train to intercept Nicola Golf. And Jules is explaining how she's going to act like she just bumped into Nicola Golf while Hanna takes her out. But right behind them is Mannion. They get to the train platform and Jules explains how she's going to be in the last train car. When the train arrives, Hanna pushes Jules back, points a gun at her face, and won't allow her on. And Jules gladly backs up. But when Hanna looks around the train, she realizes that Nicola Golf isn't on it. It's just these two random people. And then she looks back at Jules, who's on the platform, who is now smiling and waving at her, because the doors are closing and Hanna has been set up. And those two people on the train, well, they're hitmen who were sent by the pioneer group to kill Hanna. But since Hanna is a savage, she's able to take both of them out. The problem is the train was moving, and now she's at the next station. So Hanna tries to run back to the original station that she was at. But after the train left, Mannion continued to follow Jules. But Jules was onto him, and she grabs him and shoots him and kills him. And on the platform, along with the help of Leo, Jules is able to kill Nicola Golf and get on the train without being caught. So when Hanna eventually arrives back at the station, the first body she sees is Mannion's, and she kneels down close to it and takes his cell phone. And then she gets to the train platform and sees the body of Nicola Golf. And she is visibly upset knowing that she was just too late to save her. And Robert Gelder arrives in Barcelona having no idea that Nicola Golf is dead, and also having no idea that he has been watched by Clara. And then finally there's the issue of Marissa Viegler, who was ironically taken to the same black site that they were trying to interrogate Hanna at back in season 1. And they've been trying to beat the truth out of Marissa, but she's been staying steadfast, not giving them any information. They were asking Marissa who was helping her, about Hanna, but Marissa keeps acting like she doesn't know what they're talking about. At one point, though, one of the guards comes into her cell and tells her, just wait a little bit longer, we're going to get you out of this. But when the other guard comes in the room, he has to play the part and ends up smacking her in the face and walking out. But it's definitely not an ideal circumstance for Marissa Viegler at the moment. In episode 7, Hanna has arrived in Barcelona and decides to change her look, going back to the darker hair and cutting it shorter. She then starts going through Mannion's phone, and there's a lot of information on Carmichael, phone calls from Marissa, a file on Eric, and then finally there's a file on Sandy and Clara. And in that file for Clara, it says who her mom is and then also gives an update. Her mom's new name and where she's living. Because the whole time, they knew that she was alive and where she is, even though they keep peddling this rhetoric that she just disappeared. Now, another person who's arrived in Barcelona is Gelder, who upon arrival has learned that Nicola Goff has been killed and it's not safe. He meets with his daughter Kat and explains to her that his stay isn't going to be nearly as long as he expected. He needs to leave tomorrow, and he's already checked out of the hotel. Kat doesn't realize the severity of the issue and just thinks that it's her dad blowing her off again, so she's pretty pissed off about it. But when Gelder checked out of the hotel, that's when the group at the Meadows lost his scent. And Leo gives Carmichael an update that while they've lost Gelder, they're going to try to get Sandy to go through Kat to try to find out his new location. Carmichael tells him that the most important thing is getting the briefcase. And he also sends Leo over there to make sure that the job gets done. So the Meadows group sends this information over to Sandy, who heads on over to the class that her and Kat share, but Kat isn't there. And she finds Kat sulking in her dorm room. And during this conversation about what a shitty father Robert is, Sandy is just fishing to try to find out where he is located, but Kat doesn't know. Clara, meanwhile, was hanging out with one of Kat's friends when she just had a sneaky suspicion that somebody was following her. So she ends up getting up from the table and walking down a couple of alleys, up a few flights of steps, and in this empty stadium where she finds Hanna. And Hanna gives her all of the details on what went down in London and what Utrecht is actually trying to do with this mission that they have Sandy and Clara executing. Clara brings up that she's just doing a service for her country, but Hanna reminds her that you've never even been to the United States. Hanna goes on to tell her about Gelder and the hit list and tells Clara that she needs that hit list. But Clara doesn't want to hear any of this at the moment and warns her that she needs to leave town and kind of threatens her in a way. And that's when Hanna reveals to Clara that her mother is actually alive. Now, Clara doesn't believe this because she's been rejecting this theory for a while, worried that she's just going to get her heart broken again. But Hanna reassures her that that information is true and that she'll be in touch shortly and then leaves. Clara is kind of rocked by this information and finally links up with Sandy, who's a little bit pissed because she feels like Clara's been blowing her off all day on these messages that they need to execute the mission faster than they thought. They thought they had 3 days, they actually have 1 because Gelder's checked out and they need to find him. Sandy also tells her that Leo is coming to support the mission, which is weird. And when Clara asks why he's doing that, Sandy reveals that while she doesn't know, she feels like something's wrong. As Sandy is leaving the library, she gets seen by Hanna, who is in the dorm trying to locate Kat, but the security guard at the front desk isn't willing to give up the information. But when Hanna sees Sandy leaving, she feels like Sandy's going to lead her to Kat, and that's exactly what she does. And Sandy links up with Kat and is trying to convince her to go meet with her father. And eventually Kat gives in, contacting her dad to meet for lunch. So as soon as Sandy finds out that Kat and her dad are going to meet up, she lets Terry and the Meadows know. And Terry goes up to let Carmichael know, but overhears a conversation that Carmichael is having with his higher-ups, where Carmichael reveals that while he doesn't know how Tacitus came upon this information, he will find him and he will get the information, reassuring his bosses the entire time not to worry. He's even sent Leo over there to make sure the job gets done. So she kind of walks into this private conversation, but she lets Carmichael know about the lunch, and he tells her good, but now this time, make sure he doesn't get away. And after the library meeting, Clara headed back to her apartment where one of her neighbors gives her a note saying, hey, your friend left this, and obviously the friend is Hanna. And upon opening it, it's all of the information on her mother. So Clara heads on over to the computer and starts Googling this information and finds a website that does show a picture of her mother. And she decides to sign up for a fake email address and email her mom that she is, quote, interested in her services just to see if she can get a response. Now, Robert Gelder is walking over to meet his daughter for lunch, but he calls someone named Alda. And then he gives Alda instructions on what he's going to do with the briefcase and the documents. He's first to arrive at lunch, but when Kat arrives, he's a little bit annoyed because right behind Kat is Sandy, and he told Kat to come alone. Sandy lets him know that she's not staying. She just wanted to meet him because she heard so much about him, and then she exits the restaurant and is waiting in the street. And she's waiting in the street because she's supposed to meet Clara there, but Clara is nowhere to be found, having her world rocked because her mother might be alive. So Sandy calls her up wondering where she is, and Clara lets her know, I'm on my way. And in that lunch, Gelder tells Kat the severity of the situation, that he's in some deep shit, and that he never meant for her to be wrapped up in it, but unfortunately she is. So he's not the only one leaving that night, because he's booked a plane ticket for her to leave as well. It's no longer safe for her to be in Barcelona, and she does not take too kindly to this, vowing to not leave with him, and storms out of the restaurant. And when she does so, she sees Sandy waiting for her in the street, and Sandy tells her, well, I just wanted to make sure the lunch went okay, and the two go off. When in reality, Sandy was instructing Clara that her role in this is to follow Gelder back to his hotel room and shoot him. But when Clara goes to do that, Hanna cuts her off, telling her that she doesn't need to do this, and also reminding her that her mother is alive and the people that she's working for never told her. They lied to her. Clara tells her that Sandy's going to find out where this guy is staying, and Leo is flying over. No matter how much Hanna wants to stop this, she's not going to be able to. But Hanna says, I have to try, because that is what Eric trained me for. Eric trained me to stop these people. I need to stop her, Clara. Where did she take Kat? And Sandy took Kat back to her dorm room, where Clara ends up texting Sandy, hey, I'm sorry, I lost Gelder. So Sandy has to pivot, trying to get Kat to reunite with her dad once again so they can be on his tracks. But all that Kat is thinking about is going out, partying it up, and getting drunk and forgetting about the shitty lunch she just had. So the two girls get dressed up and leave for a club, and they're followed by Hanna. And at the club, Sandy is able to steal Kat's cell phone and find out the hotel that her dad is staying at. And while she's doing this, Hanna feels like it's a good time to swoop in and try to save Kat. She introduces herself but says, we gotta get out of here. I'm here to save your dad's life and you were in danger. But Kat basically tells her to piss off. So Hanna tries another approach, saying, yeah, the girl you're hanging out with, Sandy Phillips, she says she's from Ohio, right? She's never even been to Ohio. Oh, by the way, she stole your cell phone. And sure enough, when Kat goes to check her cell phone, it's not there. But even after all of that, Kat's a little suspicious. So Hanna says, here, take that item right there, and go up to her and say, oh, hey, have you heard of this school that's in your hometown? And when she pretends like she knows what you're talking about, then you'll know that she's lying. So Kat walks up to Sandy and says, oh, hey, by the way, there's a couple of Americans over there that are from your hometown in Ohio. They went to bumfuck school. Have you heard of it? And just like Hanna said, Sandy plays it off like she's heard of it, like she's been there, like she's familiar with it, and that's when Kat knows she is in deep shit. So she's able to lose Sandy, get in a cab, and head back to her dorm room to try to get her passport. And she's followed back to her dorm room by Hanna. And even though she lost Sandy, Sandy has her dad's information and ends up letting Leo, along with everybody at the Meadows, know where Gelder is located. And in Gelder's hotel room, he's realized that he can't just continue to have this briefcase on him. It's too dangerous. So he sets it up with the front desk that he will leave the briefcase along with the documents there to be picked up by Alda the next day, hopefully when he is long gone from Barcelona. Unfortunately for Gelder, he's unaware that Clara has shown up, and Sandy is in the hotel lobby, along with Leo. And all of this is being watched by Terry and Carmichael back at the Meadows. We're able to get patched into the security camera footage in Barcelona. And Clara gets a room key where in the room there's a maid's outfit that she can use to try to get into Gelder's room and kill him. And right as she's about to convince him to open the door to let her, quote, refill the soaps, that's when Kat shows up, and it kind of throws a wrench in things. But it also gives Clara and Sandy enough time to talk. And Sandy lets Clara know that the new plan is not just to kill Gelder, but to kill Kat as well. So just as Kat and Gelder are about to get out of there, Sandy and Clara burst through the door and hold them there at gunpoint, demanding to know where the briefcase is located. But Gelder says, I don't have it. It's not on me. And Sandy, who is getting visibly frustrated, finally says, you know what, Clara, kill him. We'll find the briefcase later. But Clara can't bring herself to do it. So Sandy grabs the gun, and just as she's about to kill Gelder, that's when Hanna comes bursting through the door. A little bit of a shootout ensues, but it's broken up when Sandy is able to lock herself into the bedroom along with Gelder, who she just shot in the arm. And for whatever reason, Hanna, who has seemingly forgotten about Gelder entirely, has a gun pointed at Clara. And Clara reminds her that I could have killed that guy, but I didn't. And that's when Hanna, Clara, and Kat hear a gunshot go off. And when they open the door, there is Robert Gelder's dead body lying on the bed, and Sandy is nowhere to be found. And Kat is inconsolable, crying over her dad's dead body, and Hanna gets flashbacks of when Eric died in her arms. But Hanna is able to get it together and tells Kat, if you want to live, you will come with us right now. Now, I'm sure you're wondering where Marissa Viegler is in all this. She was taken from that black site to be executed in another location. And while they're traveling there, she's telling the guys, you don't need to do this. But then all of a sudden, the entire caravan is shot up, and the caravan flips over. And when Marissa gets out, there's a woman there waiting for her that lets her know, we told you if you waited long enough, we would get you out. But Marissa has no idea who this woman is. And the woman lets her know that she was working with Stephen Mannion's group. And unfortunately, Stephen is dead. The woman informs Marissa about the Pioneer Group, and this is the first time Marissa is hearing about this, and how Carmichael is a part of it. And they're about to unleash their newest weapon, Utrex. She then shows Marissa an iPad with Gelder's picture on it, and lets Marissa know Gelder's role in this whole thing. And on the same iPad, there is a security camera picture of Hanna. And the woman tells Marissa that they need to find Hanna and they need to find Gelder's documents with the hit list, and they want Marissa to help them do that. Oh, and then there's Carmichael, who was lying the entire time. He told Leo that he knew about Gelder's name but had never met him. No, he met him. He shared a drink with him. They had a conversation. He was well aware of who Robert Gelder was. In the season finale of Hanna, Carmichael has shown up at the crime scene, but he tells the investigator there that his name is Jim Hogan and he's from the U.S. Embassy. And he's there to kind of assist with the matter since Gelder was an attorney for the U.S. government. But his real concern is if there was a briefcase or any documents found at the scene of the crime. And the Barcelona investigator says, no, should there have been? And Carmichael says, we're going to need to take a thorough look at this place. So Carmichael, along with a couple more Utrex people, kind of have that hotel on lockdown. Now, after Sandy killed Robert Gelder, she headed off to her apartment, where the next day, Leo meets her there and he's going through basic instructions on what she should do. But before he leaves, he asks her, do you know where they would have went? And they being Hanna, Clara, and Kat. And Sandy says, I don't know, airport, harbor, I would have gotten out of here. But they're already monitoring those places with no luck. So Leo tells her, keep thinking about it and let me know if you think of any places. And where they've actually gone is a villa up in the Barcelona hills. And most of the time, those villas are empty. But the one that they went to wasn't. There was a housekeeper there that's just there to kind of tend to the place while the family that actually owns the property is away. So they tie him up and kind of take over the villa as a home base. And they're trying to plan their next move, but Kat can't get over the fact that she has to hang out with the person who just had a hand in killing her dad, meaning Clara. And Hanna tries to talk to her, commiserating with her, saying that they killed my father too. And initially, Kat doesn't believe her, but Clara says, no, it's true, I was there. Hanna then asks Kat that it is of the utmost importance that she tells her every detail of her dad, why he was in Barcelona, who he was talking to, anything she can remember. So Kat tells him that her dad told her that he was in danger, and that he had a document with him that he had to give to somebody, although she's not quite sure who. And that's when Clara pulls Hanna aside and says that she was instructed to grab a briefcase, but there wasn't a briefcase found in the hotel room. But Clara does remember that just before she reached the hotel room door, posing as a maid, one of the workers at the hotel was leaving Gelder's room with a dossier. And that's what Kat is probably referring to. So Hanna knows that she has to head back to the hotel to grab this thing before the Utrex people find it. And as she's leaving, she notices that Clara has taken out the medical chip. And Clara says, yeah, I'm done with those people. And Hanna took it out a while back when she was changing her appearance. She then asks Clara if she's made contact with her mother. And Clara tells her that while she's reached out, she hasn't heard anything back yet. Right before Hanna leaves for the city, though, she tells Clara that Kat just lost her father. So be there for her like you were there for me when Eric died. And then she heads off. And it's worth mentioning that she heads off with the only gun that the two had between them. So as Hanna heads down to the city, Sandy, trying to act normal, headed to her lecture that Kat is normally in. And she plays dumb when she finds one of Kat's friends and asks where she is, but he hasn't heard from her. And that's when the lecture gets broken up by the police who want to talk to anyone who's been with Kat in the last 24 hours. And obviously Sandy is a part of that. So Sandy tells them what they did going out to a club, but then all of a sudden Kat left and she hasn't heard from her. And after playing dumb to the police, she covertly meets with Carmichael in one of the town squares. And she actually called this meeting, because after Leo told her to keep thinking about where they might go, she remembered something. One of the girls they were hanging out with mentioned the empty villas up in the hills, and how normally they're empty because they're owned by rich people that just use it as a vacation house. She tells Carmichael that Clara would have remembered that. So if you go up in the hills and sweep the area, you're probably going to find them. Carmichael gets up to leave, but then Sandy asks, just curious, what are you going to do with Clara once you find her? And when she asks this, Carmichael doesn't say anything. So Sandy makes it more clear, saying that, I don't care, she screwed me over and she's got what's coming to her. And Carmichael has the biggest shit-eating grin on his face, so proud of his little protege. So right after receiving this information, Carmichael calls Leo and has him head up to the hills. And Leo actually passes Hanna on the way up, although he doesn't notice her. And as Leo is heading up to those villas, Clara is kind of being questioned by Kat about why she did what she did, although Clara can't tell her anything. And Kat is getting more and more frustrated, mentioning, don't you have a family? And that's when Clara remembers she should probably check her email to see if her mother contacted her. So she has the guy in the home unlock the computer, and she tells him, if you talk to Kat, I'm going to kill you. And for whatever reason, she goes upstairs to check her email. But when she does check it, she has a message back from her mom, because she wisely used her birth name, and her mother noticed it and is asking, is it you? Are you okay? I want to meet you. Tell me if you're alive. And Clara is overwhelmed with emotion. At this point, though, Hanna has made it to the hotel and she goes into the employee entrance, as to not be detected by Utrecht guards, although she is detected by Marissa Wiegler and the woman who broke her out of that black site camp. Marissa tells the woman, I should probably be the one to contact her face to face since she's comfortable with me. And the woman agrees, but then she gets out of the car and makes a phone call. And she makes a phone call to Carmichael, telling Carmichael that Hanna is in the building, because this woman is not who she says she is. Hanna checks into the hotel under a fake name, and when she gets to her room, she calls down to the front desk and requests that employee who took the dossier from Gelder. And when he shows up, she holds him at gunpoint, demanding that he give her the documents. She also wants to know who the documents are being held for, and he tells her that he was told to give it to this journalist named Alba. And Hanna gets the document, and as she's leaving the hotel, she runs into Alba. She tells Alba, we're on the same team, but I need this document because Gelder's daughter is in danger, and I need this to get her out of it. Alba says, well, I need the document because Gelder was bringing it to me, and I need it for a bigger reason. And the two kind of get into a pissing match, but it's broken up when the elevator door opens and Carmichael comes out shooting at him. So the two of them get into a gun battle with a bunch of Utrecht's agents, Hanna, and at one point Alba tries to steal the documents, but she gets shot in the head. Hanna ends up getting the documents back, taking a couple people out, and going out one of the back entrances. And when she's doing it, she runs into Marissa Wiegler, who says, come with me, there's a car outside, and people who can help. But when she gets outside and sees the woman that Marissa is with, she remembers her. And she remembers seeing her from Mannion's phone, because under the Carmichael file on Mannion's phone, there's a picture of him with this woman. So Hanna turns to Marissa and says, that woman is working for Carmichael. She used you to get to me. And that's when another shootout ensues, with Hanna getting away in the car that she drove there in, and Marissa getting away in the car that she arrived in. So Hanna is heading back up to the villa, but while that shootout was going on and while Clara is checking her email, the guy who's tied up in the house tells Kat that there's an alarm, and all she has to do is punch in a code and police will come and this can all be over. And Kat does that. But when she does that, people at the Meadows alert Leo to the alarm in the hills, and he heads over there. And the security gate opens, and that's when Clara knows something went wrong, and she realizes what happened. And she's not so much pissed off at Kat, she's more pissed off at this guy. So she lets him out of there, because she knows what's coming. And as the guy sheepishly makes his way up the hill, he gets shot in the head by Leo. And Clara tells Kat very carefully what to do because she doesn't have a gun. Hanna took the only gun that they had. So Leo comes in the house and is speaking aloud to Kat, saying, we're not here for you. We're here for the person who killed your father. And Kat, who is hiding behind a couch, gets out from behind it. And when she does, Leo fires a couple shots into the couch, thinking that Clara is also behind it. But Clara isn't. She was in the ceiling and she drops down and pushes Leo into the pool. And her and Leo are fighting in this pool. And outside of it are Carmichael and the woman who double-crossed Marissa Wiegler. And Carmichael is trying to figure out who's who in the pool. And finally he just fires a shot, hoping for the best. But he doesn't hit Clara. He hits Leo. Now, Clara is trying her best not to come up for air because she knows that she's got two people ready to kill her, but you can't stay down there forever. Luckily for her, though, when she does come up for air, Hanna has arrived and she shoots the woman in the head and then shoots Carmichael in the arm. And this gives them enough time to try to get Hanna, Clara, and Kat out of there. But when they go to drive off, 3 Utrecht guards are in the driveway holding them there at gunpoint. And it looks like they're about to open fire on their car, and that's when Marissa drives by and shoots all 3 of them in the head. Hanna then hands Marissa over the file. And in the file, it has a cover letter that states that in July of 2019, a highly placed CIA agent got drunk in my presence. And that night, he revealed to me the Pioneer target list, where everybody on it is under the age of 30. Some of which are kids. And that CIA agent was John Carmichael, who was trying to recruit Gelder to the program. But Gelder was so disgusted that when Carmichael got distracted by a woman, Gelder picked up the file, took the pictures, and that's how he had the list. And that's one of the reasons why Carmichael was so flustered by this whole case, because he knows that it was actually him who set this whole thing off. So Marissa reads this, but then instructs Hanna and Claire to drive Kat to the airport, get her on a flight safely, and then just await instructions. So that's what they do. But Claire doesn't want to await instructions. Claire wants to go be with her mother, because Claire emailed her mother back specific instructions on what to do and how they should meet. And Hanna understands this. So she gives Clara her fake passport, telling her that the only people that know about this passport are Hanna, now Clara, and Marissa, who created it. She tells Clara to go be with her mother but get a new life. Never use the name Clara Mahan again. and get out of Egypt. Start over, start fresh. So Clara gets on a ferry and goes to meet her mother. And both her and her mother have a very emotional first meeting. And one of the people who knew about this meeting was Terry, who arrived for work back at the Meadows, but it wasn't a normal day. It was like an all-hands-on-deck panic as they looked for Hanna, Clara, and Kat. And Terry was given specific instructions that if Clemency Jones has any online activity to let them know, but Clemency Jones was off the grid. And on a whim, Terry typed in Clara Mahan and found the email. But when one of her superiors asked her if she found anything, Terry decides not to give her the information and says nope and deletes the file, letting Clara go be with her mother. And while that was going on, Marissa is laying down the law to Carmichael. She starts out saying that if this is what Utrecht is going to do for a whistleblower, what do you think they're going to do to you after they find out that it was actually you who tipped this whole thing off? So Carmichael says, what do you want? And Marissa tells him that he is going to tell his bosses Robert Gelder was a threat to the Utrecht project, and Carmichael killed him and covered it up perfectly. While Mia Wolf was a double agent who infiltrated the resistance organization and helped him retrieve the target list. And because of that, both Mia and Clemency will be welcomed back to the Meadows with open arms, and that together they will take down the Pioneer group one by one. And Carmichael asks her, do you seriously think you can get away with this? And she looks at him and says, yeah, and you're going to help me get away with this. Because if anything goes wrong, I'm just going to tell your bosses what you did. I'm running the show now. And at this point, Hanna has shown up, but they notice that Clara isn't there. And when Marissa asks where she is, Hanna doesn't say that she's going to be with her mother. She just says that she has other plans. Thank you so much for watching this recap. If you liked it, hit thumbs up. If you don't, hit thumbs down. Please subscribe to the channel. I would appreciate it. If you know anybody that needs a Hanna Season 2 recap or Season 1, hit that share button. I try not to read the comment section because most of the time comment sections are a cesspool. So if you wrote something nice and I don't respond, just know I do really appreciate you guys viewing this. Oh, and if you want my opinion on actual things, check out my podcast, Scene Invaders, where you can find all podcasts.